Teresa Capone was dying, and she had one last thing to tell her son Alfonso. But what she whispered in that hospital room would haunt Al Capone for the rest of his life. Chicago, November 1952. The woman who had given birth to the most notorious man in America was lying in a narrow hospital bed, her breathing shallow, her once strong hands now translucent and fragile. At 78 years old, Teresa Capone had lived through immigration, poverty, violence, fame, and disgrace. She had watched her son rise to unimaginable power and fall to crushing defeat. But she had also carried a secret for over 40 years, a secret about their family, about the choices she had made long before Alfonso became Al Capone, about sacrifices no one knew she had endured. Her final words weren't about forgiveness or regret. They were about a secret that changed everything he thought he knew about family. This is a Chicago story about a mother and son, about the weight of truth, and about how sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying burdens we never imagined. It's a dramatized account of what might have passed between them in those final moments, when pretense falls away and only honesty remains. What Teresa Capone told her son in that hospital room would reshape how he understood his entire life. It would make him question every choice he had made in the name of family honor, every sacrifice he thought he had made for their protection, every assumption he had carried about who they were and where they came from. And it would teach him that sometimes the greatest love requires the greatest silence. To understand what Teresa Capone told her son on her deathbed, you need to understand who Teresa Capone really was. Not the mother of a famous gangster, not the immigrant woman the newspapers occasionally mentioned, but Teresa herself, the woman who had shaped Alfonso Capone long before the world knew the name Al. Teresa Raiola was born in 1874 inches Angri, a small town near Naples, Italy. She grew up in grinding poverty, where families counted themselves lucky if they had bread and olive oil for dinner. Her father died when she was 12, leaving her to help her mother raise 4 younger siblings. By 18, Teresa had learned lessons about survival that would serve her for life. She learned that sometimes you do what you must, not what you want. She learned that protecting your family might require sacrifices no one would understand. And she learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and invisible. Teresa married Gabriele Capone in 1891. Gabriele was a barber who spoke often of America, of the opportunities waiting there, of the life they could build if they had courage to leave everything behind. But leaving required money they didn't have. Teresa worked as a seamstress, taking in piecework for almost nothing. Their children came: Vincenzo in 1892, Raffaele in 1894, Salvatore in 1895, and finally Alfonso in 1899. Each child made their dream of America more urgent and more impossible, more reasons to leave, fewer resources to make it happen. But Teresa had a plan that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In 1901, when Alfonso was 2 years old, Teresa made a choice that would change their family's destiny forever. She went to Signora Benedetta Torino, the wealthiest woman in Angri, a woman whose husband owned ships that sailed to America. Teresa knew what Signora Torino wanted. The woman had been married for 15 years without producing an heir. In a culture where a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children, Signora Torino was desperate enough to pay handsomely for what she needed. Teresa offered herself as what was then called a wet nurse and companion, but everyone understood what that really meant. In exchange for passage to America for her entire family, Teresa would give Signora Torino what she most desperately wanted: a child. The arrangement would last 2 years. Teresa would live in Signora Torino's house, care for her husband when he was in port, and when the inevitable child was born, she would stay to nurse and raise it as if it were Signora Torino's own. Gabriele would take their 4 boys to America immediately, establish himself, find work, and prepare a home. Teresa would join them when her obligation was fulfilled. It was, by any measure, an unthinkable sacrifice. To sell yourself, essentially, to secure your family's future. To be separated from your husband and children for years, to bear a child you would have to pretend belonged to someone else, to smile and serve and endure whatever was required. But Teresa looked at her sons, especially little Alfonso, so bright and curious and full of life, and knew she would do anything to give them a chance at something better than the grinding poverty of southern Italy. The plan worked exactly as arranged. In 1902, Gabriele and the boys sailed for America. They settled in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood full of other Italian immigrants, all chasing the same dream of reinvention. Teresa remained in Italy, living in Signora Torino's villa, playing the role of devoted companion. In 1903, she gave birth to a daughter, Maria, who was immediately claimed as Signora Torino's miracle baby. For 2 years, Teresa raised Maria, while her own sons grew up without their mother. She sang lullabies to a child she could never claim, while her own babies learned to walk and talk thousands of miles away. She celebrated Maria's first words, first steps, first birthday, while Alfonso, her Alfonso, was growing from a toddler to a little boy she barely remembered. Finally, in 1904, with her debt paid and her family's passage secured, Teresa sailed for America. She was 30 years old. She had not seen her husband or sons for nearly 3 years. Alfonso was 5 years old when she arrived, old enough to have dim memories of the mother who had disappeared from his life, too young to understand why she had left. Teresa never spoke of those years in Italy, not to Gabriele, not to her sons, not to anyone. She threw herself into the work of building their new American life, as if by working hard enough, she could somehow make up for the lost years. But the guilt followed her. Every time she looked at Alfonso, her bright, ambitious, fiercely loyal Alfonso, she remembered the daughter she had left behind in Italy. Every time he called her Mama, she thought of another child who would never know her real mother's name. And as Alfonso grew older, as he became more determined to protect and provide for his family, Teresa saw in his fierce loyalty an echo of her own desperate love. The kind of love that would sacrifice anything, endure anything, pay any price to keep the people you care about safe and fed and free. Alfonso Capone grew up believing his mother was the strongest person he had ever known. He saw her strength in how she managed their household on Gabriele's modest income, how she stretched every penny, made every meal filling, kept their clothes clean no matter how little they had. He saw it in her silence about the old country. While other immigrant mothers filled their children's ears with stories about villages they had left behind, Teresa spoke only about the future. America was their home now. Success was their destiny now. Young Alfonso absorbed these lessons completely. Family came first, always. Strength meant providing for the people you loved, no matter the cost. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was keep quiet and endure whatever life threw at you. As Alfonso grew older, he appointed himself his mother's protector. When boys made fun of his father's accent, Alfonso settled it with his fists. When anyone suggested the Capone family didn't belong, Alfonso made sure they understood otherwise. Teresa watched her son's fierce protectiveness with pride and worry. She was proud he loved his family deeply, that he understood loyalty was the most important virtue. But she worried about where his protectiveness might lead him. By his teens, it was clear traditional paths wouldn't satisfy Alfonso's ambitions. He was too impatient for slow progress, too proud to accept the limitations poverty placed on immigrant families. Alfonso, she would say carefully, remember that the fastest path is not always the safest path. But Alfonso was 18, full of confidence and ambition. Mama, things are different now. There are opportunities for people brave enough to take them. I'm going to make sure our family never worries about money again. Teresa understood more than her son realized. She understood what it meant to make dangerous deals for family's sake, what it cost to do things you never imagined because the people you loved needed more than honest work could provide. And she understood that once you started down that path, it became very difficult to find your way back. By 1920, Alfonso had become Al Capone. The young man who had once fought neighborhood bullies to defend his family's honor was now one of the most powerful criminals in America. The boy who had wanted to make sure his mother never worried about money again had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. But success came with a price that Teresa understood better than anyone. She watched her son become a public figure, his name in newspapers, his face on wanted posters. She watched him surround himself with bodyguards because his life was constantly in danger. She watched him build walls around their family because association with the Capone name could be deadly for anyone who wasn't under his protection. Most of all, she watched him carry the weight of responsibility for dozens of families, hundreds of men, an entire organization that depended on his decisions and his strength. Teresa recognized that weight. She had carried a similar burden for 40 years, though on a much smaller scale. She knew what it felt like to make choices that other people couldn't understand because they didn't know what you were really protecting. And she knew that Al, her Alfonso, had no idea how much his desire to protect his family had actually cost them all. For 30 years, as Al Capone built his empire, Teresa carried her secret alone. She watched her son make increasingly dangerous enemies in the name of family honor. She watched him become more isolated, more burdened by his responsibilities. And every day, she wondered if she should tell him the truth about why they had really come to America. Al believed they had immigrated through honest work and saving, but he didn't know about the 2 years Teresa had spent in Signora Torino's villa. He didn't know about the daughter she had born and left behind. He didn't know their passage to America had been purchased with his mother's sacrifice. By 1930, Teresa began receiving letters from Italy, letters from Maria Torino, the daughter Teresa had born and raised for 2 years before coming to America. Maria was now 27, married, with children, and she was asking questions. "I know this may sound strange," Maria wrote, "but I have always felt that you were more than just my nurse. I have dreams where you are holding me, and in these dreams, you feel like family." The letters broke Teresa's heart and terrified her. If Al learned that their American life had been purchased through what amounted to prostitution, that his mother had sold herself to secure their passage, that there was another Capone child living in Italy while he controlled millions, Teresa couldn't imagine how that knowledge would affect him. Would he see it as betrayal? Would he lose respect for her? Would it make him feel obligated to reach out to Maria, incorporating this Italian half-sister into their dangerous American lives? So Teresa kept silent, as she had for 30 years. She maintained the fiction that she had been merely a hired caregiver. But the weight of the secret grew heavier every year, especially as she watched Al make increasingly dangerous sacrifices in the name of protecting his family. The irony was overwhelming. Al had become a criminal to ensure his family's security. But his mother had made compromises that were just as morally complex, long before he was old enough to understand what sacrifice really meant. Teresa Capone's health began failing in autumn 1952. She was 78, and her body was surrendering to 8 decades of hard work, worry, and secrets. It started with fatigue that wouldn't lift. Then came shortness of breath, swelling in her legs, nights when her heart seemed to work too hard just to keep beating. Al, now 53 and dealing with his own health problems from syphilis, still visited every week. Despite everything that had happened, conviction, prison, public humiliation, Teresa remained the most important person in his world. In those final months, their conversations took on a different quality. Less talk about daily concerns, more comfortable silence. Sometimes, Al would just sit with her, holding her hand. Teresa knew she was dying. In 1952, advanced heart disease was essentially a death sentence. The doctors were kind but honest. There was little they could do except make her comfortable. But knowing she was dying made the weight of her secret unbearable. Soon, the truth about their family would die with her. Al would spend his life believing an incomplete story. More importantly, Maria, her daughter in Italy, would spend her life wondering about the connection she felt but could never understand. In October, Teresa suffered what her doctor called a serious cardiac episode. She was hospitalized for a week, and when she came home, everyone understood her time was measured in weeks rather than months. Al began visiting daily, spending afternoons reading to her, sitting quietly while she dozed. The man who had once commanded an army now spent his days caring for his dying mother with the tenderness of a devoted son. It was during these visits that Teresa understood she would have to make a choice. The opportunity for truth was running out. She could take her secret to the grave, or she could tell him everything. November 15th, 1952. Teresa Capone's final day began like all the others in recent weeks. Al arrived at her apartment in the early afternoon, bringing flowers from her favorite shop and news from the outside world that might interest her without troubling her. But Teresa could feel something different in her body that day, a kind of loosening, as if the strings that had held her together for so long were finally beginning to fray. She knew, with the certainty that comes to people who are very close to death, that this would be her last opportunity to speak the truth. "Alfonso," she said, using the name she had called him as a child, "come sit close to me. There is something I must tell you." Al pulled his chair next to her bed and took her hand. Her skin was translucent now, her fingers like delicate bird bones in his large palm. Despite everything he had become, everything he had done, in this moment he was simply a son caring for his dying mother. "What is it, Mama? Do you need anything? Should I call the doctor?" Teresa shook her head slowly. "No, mio caro. What I need is to tell you something I should have told you long ago. Something about our family, about how we came to America, about why I made the choices I made." She paused, gathering her strength and her courage. This confession would require both. "Alfonso, do you remember anything about Italy? About the time before we came here?" Al frowned slightly. "Not much, Mama. I was very young. I remember Papa talking about wanting to come to America, about working to save money for our passage. I remember you working very hard, always sewing, always busy. And do you remember me leaving? Do you remember when I was gone for a while?" Al's frown deepened. He had some dim, troubling memories of his mother disappearing from their lives for what seemed like a very long time. But he had never asked about it directly, and she had never volunteered an explanation. I think I remember you being away, but I was so young, I thought maybe I was remembering it wrong." Teresa closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the strength to continue. "You were not remembering wrong, Alfonso. I was away for 2 years, from when you were 2 until you were almost 5, and I need to tell you why." She told him everything, about the grinding poverty in Italy, about the impossible dream of bringing the whole family to America, about Signora Torino and the arrangement they had made. She told him about the 2 years she had spent in the villa, playing the role of companion and mistress to secure their family's future, about giving birth to Maria and raising her as Signora Torino's child while her own sons grew up without her. She told him about the guilt she had carried for 50 years, about the daughter she had left behind, about the letters that had been arriving from Italy for the past 20 years. "Alfonso, you have a sister. Her name is Maria, and she lives in Naples. She is 49 years old, with children and grandchildren of her own. She has been writing to me, asking questions about her childhood, wondering about the connection she remembers feeling with me." Al listened in complete silence. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, a kind of devastated comprehension. "Mama, you mean you?" "I mean, I sold myself, Alfonso. I sold my body and 2 years of my life to buy our family's passage to America. I gave birth to another man's child and had to pretend she belonged to someone else. I left her behind, so that I could come here to you and your brothers." The silence in the room was profound. Al sat perfectly still holding his mother's hand, but Teresa could see him struggling to reconcile this revelation with everything he thought he knew about their family's story. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell any of us?" Teresa's eyes filled with tears, the first tears Al had ever seen her shed. "Because I was ashamed, mio caro. Because I knew that what I had done, no matter why I did it, was not something a good woman should do. Because I was afraid you would think less of me, that you would be disgusted by the choices I made. But Mama, you did it for us. You sacrificed yourself for your family." "Yes, but at what cost? I abandoned one child to save 4 others. I left Maria in Italy, wondering her entire life why she felt connected to someone she could barely remember. I let you all believe that we had come to America through honest work and saving, when the truth was much more complicated." Teresa struggled to sit up slightly, using what remained of her strength to make sure Al understood what she was trying to tell him. "Alfonso, for 50 years I have watched you risk everything for this family. I have watched you make dangerous choices, criminal choices, all in the name of protecting us and providing for us. And every day, I wondered if I was responsible for that." "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe you learned from me that sometimes you do whatever is necessary for your family, no matter what it costs you personally. Maybe watching me work so hard, make such sacrifices, taught you that family honor requires any sacrifice, any compromise." She paused, breathing heavily with the effort of speaking so much. "But Alfonso, I want you to understand something. The choice I made in Italy, it was born from desperation, not strength. I was young and terrified, and I couldn't see any other way to save my children. But it cost me a daughter, and it cost Maria a mother, and it cost all of us 50 years of truth." Teresa reached up with her free hand and touched Al's face, the way she had when he was a little boy. "The strongest thing I could have done would have been to find another way. The bravest thing would have been to face poverty with integrity, rather than escape it through compromise. And the most loving thing would have been to trust you with the truth, instead of letting you build your entire life on a story that wasn't complete." Al was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he realized what his mother was really telling him. "You're saying that all the things I did, all the choices I made to protect our family, I'm saying that sometimes the people we love most are carrying burdens we never knew about. I'm saying that family honor isn't about being perfect or pure, it's about telling the truth, even when the truth is complicated and painful." Teresa's breathing was becoming more labored, but she had one more thing she needed to say. "Alfonso, Maria, your sister, she deserves to know who she really is. After I'm gone, if you choose to reach out to her, to let her know she has family in America, I would understand. She has been wondering about her connection to me her entire life. She deserves to know that what she felt was real." Al squeezed his mother's hand tighter. "Mama, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to process this." "You don't have to say anything right now, mio caro. Just know that I loved you all enough to do terrible things and wonderful things. Just know that family is complicated, that love sometimes requires choices that other people can't understand, and that the truth is always better than a beautiful lie, even when it hurts." Teresa closed her eyes, exhausted by the effort of finally releasing the secret she had carried for so long. "I'm tired now, Alfonso, but I'm not sorry I told you. You deserve to know. Our family deserved to know. And Maria, she deserved to be known." Teresa Capone died 3 hours after her confession, with Al beside her bed, still struggling to understand everything she had told him. The woman who had shaped his understanding of family loyalty had revealed herself to be infinitely more complicated than he had imagined. But somehow, this didn't diminish his love for her. Instead, It deepened his understanding of what real strength looked like. 2 weeks after Teresa's funeral, Al wrote a letter to Italy. "Dear Maria," he began, "I hope you will forgive a letter from a stranger, but I believe we are not strangers. My name is Alfonso Capone, and I live in Chicago, America. Before she died, my mother Teresa told me about you. She told me that you are my sister." Al explained, as gently as he could, the circumstances of Maria's birth and Teresa's sacrifice. He described their family in America, their struggles and successes. "My mother carried the secret of your existence for 50 years, Al wrote, "not because she was ashamed of you, but because she was ashamed of the circumstances. She loved you enough to leave you in safety rather than take you to an uncertain future with us." 3 weeks later, Maria's response arrived. "Dear Alfonso, my brother," she wrote, "I have read your letter 20 times, and each time I understand something new about my life, about the dreams I have always had. I want you to know that I am not angry. I cannot imagine the desperation that would lead our mother to make such a choice, but I can understand the love behind it. I have always known, somehow, that I had a family somewhere else. Now I understand those dreams were about you, about brothers I was connected to, but could never reach." The correspondence between Al and Maria continued for the remaining years of Al's life. They shared photographs, stories, memories of Teresa. They never met in person, but they developed a relationship that was healing for both. Most importantly, both learned what Teresa had tried to teach Al in her final confession, that real family strength comes not from maintaining perfect appearances, but from telling the truth and accepting the complexity of the people we love. Al Capone died in January 1947, 5 years after his mother's deathbed confession. Those final years were the most peaceful of his adult life. His empire was gone, his power was broken, but he had found something that had eluded him during his years of greatest success, an understanding of what family really meant. Teresa's secret hadn't diminished Al's respect for his mother. Instead, it had taught him that the people we love are often more complicated, more courageous, and more human than we ever realized. The lesson Teresa taught her son on her deathbed wasn't about guilt or shame. It was about the difference between the stories we tell ourselves about our families and the more complicated truths that actually shape our lives. It was about understanding that love sometimes requires impossible choices, that strength isn't always visible, and that the people who sacrifice the most are often the ones who keep quietest about their pain. Al had spent his entire adult life trying to protect his family through power, money, and fear. But his mother's final gift was the understanding that the deepest protection comes from honesty, acceptance, and the willingness to love people fully, even when you finally learn how complicated they really are. The secret Teresa whispered in that hospital room didn't haunt Al Capone. Instead, it freed him from believing that love required perfection, that loyalty demanded ignorance, and that family honor could only be maintained through beautiful lies. Sometimes, the greatest gift a dying parent can give their child is the truth, even when the truth is painful, complicated, and changes everything you thought you knew. Because understanding who your family really is, with all their compromises and sacrifices and secrets, is the foundation of real love. And real love, Teresa Capone knew, was worth more than any beautiful story you could ever tell yourself.